You're listening to Pathways and Means, a podcast that inspires and shows people how to tap into their creative spirit. We sit down with leaders and makers in every industry to talk about their process, what inspires them, and about how to build incredible things with the power of creativity. The future belongs to the creators, so come join us. This is Pathways and Means. What is up, everybody? We are here again with another Pathways and Means podcast. It's been a fun couple of weeks here around the office. We've been leaning into a couple of relationships with some new potential clients, been delivering on some with some groups that we already have. And in particular, some of those projects have really made us wrestle with this question of perfect versus done, right? Whenever you're making something as a creator, you're sort of forced between two different poles, which is, I want to make this thing as wonderful and close to my vision as I can possibly make it. And then there's like time and resources and effort and all of these other things that get in the way of your vision that are necessary to move it forward. But man, if it sometimes it just really doesn't feel like we're able to make that thing happen how we want it to. So today we really want to wrestle with this perfect versus done question, just as much for us as it may be for you. There's been some good commentaries and some good science behind the question. So to just go ahead and kick it off, SJ, especially in some of the different creative disciplines you've been in, you've probably wrestled with this quite a bit. What are your thoughts on perfect versus done? Do you have a preference?
Man, I know you've probably heard this from me a million times because we do a lot of things together, a lot of events and stuff. And people can take it the wrong way sometimes because I'm always happy, or I'm just happy when it's done. When it's over with. And some people can look at that as, so what, you really just wanted to just get it over with? And I'm like, yeah, I really wanted to just get it over with. But what I'm saying is I want to make sure that I delivered what I said I could do. So like in the form of volunteerism, we want to make sure that if we say we're going to do something, we're going to get the volunteers there. We're going to be there the whole time. And then after that, when it's done, it's just resume stuff. At that point, that means we got through it. We did it in excellence, because anything that we're doing, we're going to make sure we're doing that. I mean, whatever little quirks might come up. But when you're done with it, that is something that you have now. It's like, we did this. We did the country stampede. We got through it. And then from that, everybody else can be like, oh, that's a behemoth of an event. That's this. I don't know how they did it. And then we could talk about it later. But getting it over with and done, we may have not have done it perfect, but we got it finished and our clients were satisfied. So done for me is always going to be better than perfect.
See, that's, I'm somebody who's a maximizer by nature. So I'm always looking to squeeze as much juice out of just about any project that I'm working on as I can. Right. And sometimes that can create the opposite situation where it's like either you won't go into certain territory if you don't think you can get it done with the resources that you have allotted, or you end up agreeing to something. And as you're going through the process of really ended up building it out, there's this inner tension that happens when you've got a vision for what it is that you're going to deliver versus what the reality of how am I going to get this done? How are we going to be able to deliver it to make sure that things don't fall apart while that's going on? It's kind of a blessing and a curse, because every single time we put something out, right, tend to be really proud of the design, really proud of the product. Right. But somewhere you have to be able to find the resources, the time, the money, the energy, the know-how to invest into it to get from here to wherever your idea is. And man, there's been some long nights sometimes. And I think our experiences together have helped move me closer towards the other side. When it comes to perfection, right, there's a law in psychology that I think could help a lot of people understand it, because you start with this idea in your head of how good something is going to be. What's the target? When am I going to go towards it? And it's called Parkinson's law. And Parkinson's law states that the resources that are allocated for a project will fill up the container that they're given. So we see that in a handful of different ways, right? If you got a deadline of a year, how long is it going to take you to finish a project?
It's going to take you a year.
You're going to find a way to drag it out for the whole year. if you're given 2 weeks for that same project, 9 times out of 10, if it's physically possible, you'll find a way to do it in 2 weeks, won't you?
Yeah, we've done it. I mean, we've done it in 2 days. I mean, there's been times where there's only been that much time, and we actually took something on just to help some people out. But no, I mean, it's a wonderful law. I mean, it's factual.
Right, and it's not even just time. It's things like financial resources. So if you want to go on a spending spree, say you want to get some new threads or something like that, if you're given $100, you're probably going to spend the whole Benjamin.
Right.
If you're given $15, you may end up going to the thrift store and finding a way to really make it stretch, right? Or you'll go ahead and blow it. But the resources are given the container, or they fill the container that they're given. So sometimes perfection is really, really challenging, right? Because we've got these big, audacious goals. And if you want to build a perfect business, you want to get the perfect album, right? You want to start writing an album that feels like real representative of me, because I know what sort of lyrics I could write, what sort of music I could write. If I was just given enough time, it'd be perfect. And then you go ahead and you set off for however long. You don't really have a deadline. You don't have resources. You spend 2-3 years just riffing on some things and end up getting nowhere. So there's been this conversation, especially in the creator community. We see people like Peter McKinnon. He's got this saying that he's really, really big on, and it's done is better than perfect, right? So I think maybe we should look at each one of those sides, done versus perfect, or perfect versus done, and maybe talk a little bit about what scenarios each one's useful for. Yeah,
well, I know with me, we'll take like a song, for instance. I was working on some material. Actually, it was a song called Hallelujah. And it's like I really wanted to make this exactly what I needed it to be. So I found myself writing different verses. I'm throwing away verses. I'm writing verses, I'm throwing away those verses. It's like, and I used so many different styles. You know, I had the choppy style, you know, the double time, triple time, whatever you want to call it. Then I had some where I went back and I was doing something with a slower flow or whatever, just putting everything in there. But what I found out is I went all the way back from scratch again. And then I started going through old lyrics, and I ended up finding something that just ended up fitting, something I wrote almost 2 years ago. And this was the day before I was going into the studio. And it was almost like, man, I found the perfect thing. I took that and I adjusted a couple of different things, and then it was done. Right? Because before it's done, I can't go to the studio and put it down. I'm sitting here in the ether, you know, to where it's like, okay, I've got this song. It's going to be good, but it's not done. So I really don't know what to do with it. I can't come in here and record it because everything might change. But I'm sitting on some heat. But you're really not, because you can't do anything with it. You're not going to share an unfinished song with somebody. So done is definitely better than perfect, because now I have the song done with recycled 2 years ago lyrics that the world never heard, because I write so much and some stuff never sees the light of the day because it's unfinished. So done being better than perfect for me is that all day long. No. Although at different times I have been a perfectionist, but being a perfectionist in some things, I never got some things complete.
Right. No, I feel that. I think a lot of times when it comes to valuable creative work, done is useful because it's a complete thing that you can give somebody. And maybe it doesn't live up to whatever vision it is that you had for how great it could be. But the only things that are really valuable for somebody are those things that we're able to give them in its complete form, whether or not it's perfect, right? Absolutely. Like I would rather have an oil change done. Maybe it's not the perfect oil, maybe it wasn't the cleanest, but it's like, it's done, and so we can move forward. Now it's not always the case, but 9 times out of 10, there's just so much to do on any given project, right? Like you really want to write the lyrics, find the beat, show up to the studio, go ahead and record it, mix it, master it, get it produced. If you get so hung up on perfection in any one of those given points, you're going to put yourself light years behind in terms of progress. And sometimes maybe we have to step out of the way of our ego, step out of the way of all sorts of things so we can just go ahead and push and make sure that it happens. I know that that's something that we have really been playing with just inside some of these different businesses, because so much of what we're doing with the courseware, so much of what's happening with like the volunteer experience, etc.
Right.
Sometimes like that little bit of extra effort that you can put onto something will take it over the edge. And so I think most of the time, if you're given a huge list of tasks, right, it's a lot better for you to just go ahead and start punching it through. You can always go back, right, and update it later if you need it, after you're already helping people, after you already ship whatever it is that you're getting ready to do. And plus, if you get through that, chances are you're going to learn a thing or two, and you're going to be better when you go back.
No, absolutely. And you know what's cool is what you were just saying to me musically, that's where the remix lives, right? You come out with a song and everything. It might not be perfect, but the people is feeling it. And then during that time, you can have more time to actually try to perfect it. You get some other people on that, because now, the world being your oyster, because there's so many different artists out there who could contribute to that song if they're feeling it. So you get a song out there that might not be perfect yet, and then with some of the feedback as you put it out there into the interwebs, the internets, all this type of stuff, and to get caught up in the web, and then people are like, hey, that is dope. And they're like, hey, would you like to be a part of this? We love to include people. You never know when we might ask you something, but then you'll end up having like the Craig Mack remix with Papa Love It when she does it. Ooh, damn. Hollister Hollywood, but is he good? You know what I'm saying? I mean, so we got LL Cool J on the Craig Mack remix. You had Biggie on it. So the very first song was a slam hit, but then the remix came and they were able to get to that closer to perfection because you got all these great people on it. So yeah, that's just another thing is, there's 2.0s, and that's when you're going from better to even best.
No, that's right. Thank you for not speaking to the Ignition remix. All right.
Yeah, it's all good.
So there is one time in particular that I think people should be thinking about that perfection should maybe be considered, right?
Okay.
And I know generally speaking, the two of us kind of take two different postures towards it. It's good to have it done. I'm over here trying to maximize. There is a time for you to maybe be pushing a little bit better than just done, and that's in any environment where you're competing.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right. So funny thing, like let's take for example, let's say if we were a video production company, right? A lot of video producers, the way that they get their name out there in the world is by posting a highlight reel. Mm-hmm. So they've got all their top stuff strung together, it all looks beautiful and everything, and that's how the world's going to judge you. Right. And in that instance, if you were to just go ahead and get it done, hey, it's just one more thing that I got to punch out. Well, that's great because it's done and you can give it to the world. But if there are 10 different companies that all have their reel out there, the person that's able to do 3% more, 5% more, 10% more, when all of a sudden everybody is looking out there in the world deciding who they're going to go with, the person that eked out something that was a little bit closer to perfect is going to win 70, 80, 90% more of the business.
Yeah, you're right.
And in that instance, that 5 to 10% is going to make a huge difference for you. So in competitive environments, it's worth considering maybe going a little bit deeper.
I agree with that completely. I mean, because that's what they're going to be judging you off of what you put out there into the world. It's like whenever you're putting snippets or anything like that out there, you want to make sure you put in a lot of work on that to where you didn't just get it done. Even when we talk about just having it done, we're not talking about really just putting something out there that isn't even any good. I mean, there's different levels of perfection, to where you can spend hours and hours and hours on one portion of a video or whatever, and it's going to look good, and there's a time for that, and there's a place for that. But like how we were getting out these videos to the Jack K people just last week. What was so good about it is when we actually previewed it for them, we saw at that point that we already went past their expectations, surpassed it, highly. And we had a meeting right before then thinking that we might have to go back to the drawing board if they don't like it. And when you're thinking like that, to where it's like, man, we're putting this work in, this stuff looks good, we put hours into it, but we're still gonna be prepared to make it right for them if it's not up to their standard. But then when it eclipsed their standard like that, it's not like we backtracked and said, hey, now we can just let our hair down. We said, now we know where we need to be at, and we're gonna still continue to put the work in. So with that type of stuff, you definitely wanna be closer to the perfect.
Well, I think in both the actual work and even getting the opportunity to do the work right, it's good to have a mental construct to decide, should I really push for perfection here, or should I maybe make something that we just go ahead and get it done? So if I'm marketing a product or service, if I'm out there, I'm trying to get gigs, right? That's something that you want to invest more time in to make it look perfect, because that little bit of extra is going to get you a lot more attention and a lot more business.
Right.
But after you get the deal, right, you're not competing anymore.
Right.
Go ahead and just get it done, right? Continue to grow, continue to learn, continue to do the best that you can to be excellent given the time frame that you're given, the resources that you're given. But at that point, you've already won. Stop fighting.
Right. No, absolutely. And the thing is, and don't let your hair down when you get to that point. Make sure you still keep things at a standard to where they're going to be happy with what you're doing, because that's how it's not about just getting the business. It's about keeping the business, and everybody wants deliverables. So make sure you can deliver on those, and with that, everything is not going to be able to be perfect, so just make sure that you've got a standard that you keep and you stay there. Don't just let your hair down just because you got the deal, you delivered something, and now your work just starts going downhill. You can't do it like that, so always hold yourself to a certain standard, but that standard does not have to be perfect.
Right. So especially with a lot of the media that we produce, our media director, Ryan, I think a lot of times there's probably places where he has to make the decision between how brilliant am I going to make this thing, or how important is it that we just get it out the door? And it's absolutely been saving grace for us when we snap in the booth and we're just not sure what decision we need to be making.
Snap in the booth. That boy Ryan be snapping in the booth. Well, what are your thoughts on the perfection and?
Well, like in terms of especially, my chosen craft is the videography, and so it can be really difficult sometimes to parse between, especially what you're trying to perfect in terms of the product itself and what percent you're trying to perfect in terms of I want to be great, like it's for me, But what you always remember is if you spent 10 years trying to make the right product, and then by the time you put it out, it's already outdated, then it's not perfect anyway. So you always want to remember what you're doing it for. It's like, this is not, like when we're making products that are out there, we're trying to change people's lives with, it's not for my ego. This isn't something that I'm putting it together so that I can feel good about whatever I made. So keeping the mission in mind, like you had said, it's about maintaining a standard because we respect the craft, we respect our audience and what we're trying to make. So it's not as if cutting corners isn't a thing that would ever be done. But also, if you go through and are so nebulous in each frame to frame thing and you spend 10 minutes on each one, then they're never going to get it anyway, and they're never going to get the benefit from it. So, by all means, take your craft seriously and take your art seriously, but remember what you're doing it for, and have a little bit of urgency in terms of if the thing that you're making is important, then it would be better if they got it sooner rather than later. And if you're waiting on every frame to be perfect, it's going to be forever before they see it, and it's not going to be useful to them by that point.
No, that's fantastic. There was something that my pastor ended up hitting me. He runs a nonprofit here in the city, and so there's some mentorship that goes on, especially as we're on the upward curve for our little group, Top Tier. And he said something one day that really, really struck me. I think in part because of how low the number was. But he told me, and this is a good marker for anybody that has to manage people or collaborates with people, because you might have a vision for how good something needs to be, and then you have the people that you're working with, right? And it's almost never the case that your vision is going to match what someone else is going to do just because they don't have your vision. He said this: if they can do it 60% as good as you can, let them do it. That number feels abysmally low, but it's right. And when you let people go ahead and get 60% of it done, like you were saying earlier, it's good to have something done. And the best way for you to do that is to have more people coming beside you. It ain't about the 100%. It's about getting it done. And partnering seems to be the best way to make that happen.
Right, because people are the greatest resource. I mean, we've talked about 6 degrees of separation before. Like, through 6 individuals, you can get to anybody you want to. The power of networking, the power of all these different things, but also through that, those people are going to have learnings, because they might start out doing a 60% as good, but if you never give them the opportunity to do that, then they won't continue to close that gap. So I can see how that can be beneficial in so many different ways.
Right. I love even thinking about it that way. It's one thing when you're the person that's allowing someone that's 60% as good as you to do something. Probably don't really stop to think about how almost every time you've been mentored by a manager or an expert, you've been the one that's only 60% as good. And they took the patience to let you really grow in those areas when they could have just went in and made some little changes themselves, or said, get off the stage, I'm the front man now. It's like, that's not how mentorship works. That's not how people grow. You have to live in that space. And for that matter, unless you've been living under a rock, the only reason that some of us have gotten to be that good is because someone has allowed for us that space to grow.
Gave us that opportunity. Yeah. I mean, that's real talk. It's just like, as an artist, anybody, when an artist first started out doing anything, I mean, whatever it was, you're going to do it badly. And that's just it. So you got to tell people that. I mean, people need to know this, because if not, they might quit. And they were way ahead of where they probably even should have been, because they didn't know where they should have been, because they're new to it. So anything worth growing and getting better at is worth doing badly at the beginning. But just know that whether you're drawing, whether you're rapping, whether you're singing, whether you're dancing, whether it's crocheting, whatever it is, you're going to do it badly at the beginning. It's okay. Do it badly and allow yourself to get better.
So how do you balance this urge between, maybe you're someone that's just getting into a skill and you want to be good fast, and it's easy to get frustrated because you're not good enough, or even if you're already skilled on something and you have to make choices between how good am I going to make something? What's sort of some different heuristics, some different ways that you approach that problem?
I mean, right now I'm dealing with some stuff right now, as far as I'm a typer who pecks, right? So now, as we've been banging out these scripts and everything else that we're doing, I'm keeping my hands on the home keys. And I have some other issues even with my hands. I've had my wrist slit pretty badly, and I've lost feeling in these 2 fingers here. But so it's still challenging, but I'm getting better. I think I'm probably close to about 60 words a minute at this point, maybe 45 or something. But I mean, I'm doing it. So what it is just basically knowing that this is what I need to do. It might be easier for me to do, the peck again, and that's one of the tendency that comes, peck. But then I'm like, no, so I don't. And it's just basically just having a conscious decision to not do that. And as far as when it comes to being a perfectionist with some of the raps I might do, or whatever else that I might be coming up with, I just make sure that I just kind of keep it moving. I don't want to spend too much time, because that's that, excuse me, anybody might be offended by this, but that's that backpack rap stuff. You know what I'm saying? I don't need every syllable, every this. I don't need to rhyme 8 rhymes within 1 line or whatever, just whatever, and put it out there, because they're going to call me a backpacker anyway if I was to do that. I ain't got time for that. So therefore, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and I'm going to put the right stuff in there, and I'm going to make sure that they can get the story, they can get the message, message with it. As long as they get the message like a text on their phone, boom, I'm good. You know, it doesn't have to be all this other stuff to where I'm trying to outdo like how an Eminem might come on his stuff. If you're trying to compete with him and how he does it, you're going to lose every time, because this is how he moves. It's what he does. So you get into the zone on how you move and what you do and put it out there to him. So that's how I kind of just stay on. I don't try to compete. I don't try to do what the other person does, and because comparisons are the thief of joy, and they'll have you chasing your tail.
You know, I hope you don't mind me saying, but having sat here and been part of this conversation and listening, I think I might have come up with maybe a simple but not easy way of thinking about done versus perfect. And again, it's really simple, but in practice, it's probably very difficult, and I'd love both of your thoughts on it. You got to know when good enough is good enough, you know, and that it takes a little bit of, you know, pride in your abilities to say this is good enough. It also takes a little bit of humility to say, well, I could do better, but this is fine. So it's kind of tough in both areas, but that's sort of as far as being a creator, or as far as making products, that's what it's got to be. You know, you got to know when good enough is good enough. And that's kind of the antidote to, you know, forcing yourself to work forever at perfection, which might not come. But you also, like we've said, don't want to sacrifice the quality of the product. So it's got to be good enough, but it's got to be only good enough. So I kind of wonder what your guys' thoughts are on that.
I think it's a really good way of looking at it, and I think that there's something that is buried in that statement. There's an assumption there that is really, really important. Our creations are very rarely just for ourselves, but we create as if it's only for ourselves. When we're making a project, a lot of times we're analyzing it based off of what we feel, what we think, what we believe it ought to be, and it actually ends up getting way away from what the person that it's meant for, what they want out of it, right? And like as an artist, if you're making music for you, then at that point, you know, still set yourself a deadline so that Parkinson's law works in your favor, but ultimately you're the judge of whether or not it's good enough. But man, if you just need to get an album out, if you just need to get a product out, you sometimes checking yourself and saying, I'm analyzing this based off of what I think. Maybe I should go back and actually speak with the audience, the managers, the producers, the whoever, to figure out, am I on target? And then I think the second and last thing that I would say, there's one little friend that visits us very often, and its name starts with good. Ryan, you want to tell them?
So you're just putting me on blast like this right now. Okay, yeah. All right. So there's this friend who comes along, and this friend's name is the Good Idea Fairy. And what happens is you'll have a system that's just killing it, and we're just doing great, and everything's coming on schedule, and you feel good about it. Then the Good Idea Fairy shows up and is like, hey, I can do this way better. Why don't you throw out that whole plan that you guys are doing that's working really well and change everything from the ground up, because it'll be way better. And doesn't work out that way, generally speaking, but very hard not to listen when that friend shows up.
Yeah, Good Idea Fairy's got some magic behind her. It's dark magic, it's bad magic, but it is magic. And then there was another one that came up while we were just saying this. It's the maximizer monster. And that's when you coming in and trying to squeeze every little bit of juice out of what it can be. And guess what? Perfection's not possible 9 times out of 10. You're not going to be able to attain the fullness of whatever vision it is that you have without potentially years and years of work, years that you can't get back, years that you don't have. And that, as you mentioned with, you know, the project, that if you take 10 years, it's obsolete by the time you ship it, right? So that's not even the goal. It's a monster that can come in and can destroy your creative flow if you think that you have to do everything about it. So, you know, batting the Good Idea Fairy away, trying to put the maximizer monster back underneath the bed. Remember that most creations, you're not doing it for yourself. So actively bring in people to be part of that judgment process so that they can say, I love it. Because believe it or not, sometimes hearing, that was fantastic, I love it, maybe I'd change these few little things, it gives you a sense of peace, and it makes it a lot easier for you to go ahead and kick it out.
No, it definitely does. I mean, it's one of those things, because when you're creating something, you don't know how it's going to affect somebody. I still go back to the performance when Dr. Walt Miniger came out to the I Pressed On at TPAC. And I had this song, I just switched the beat the day before because I was not happy with it. And I think it's the first time you actually heard it on the new beat. And it was the Hate On song where I'm talking about Facebook and everything else. And the chorus is, I checked my Facebook status, Holmes, and I woke up to getting hated on, right? And before that chorus was done, most of the crowd was repeating it. I've never had that happen on any song in my life. Right then, I knew that I was sitting on some heat. But like I said, with that shared experience and that feedback that came back, let me know that it was the business.
Right, absolutely. Well, this conversation might not have been perfect, but it is done. We hope that some things that we've talked about have been useful for being able to navigate how much sauce you need to be putting into your different creative efforts. It's an ongoing learning process, and as we pick new things up, we'll sprinkle them in. But man, it's been another good conversation.
Boom. Always good talking to you, Mr. Connor Englands and Ryan Brinkers. The Brinkster.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope you found today's episode informative and inspiring. If you liked what you heard and you want to hear more, be sure to subscribe to Pathways and Means wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to learn more about CPM and how to grow creatively into the future, visit creativepathwaysandmeans.com, or you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok, where we post daily content and connect and engage with creators like you. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.